Several weeks ago, I received a call requesting that I send a narrative resume for a project that an institution is doing. And so I pulled out my Vita, my CV, and I began to look at it. It's something I've kept up through the years where you just list out the things you've done, the places you've been, the positions you've held, that kind of stuff. And I started looking it over again. It was kind of a trip down memory lane. There are things on there that are so-called accomplishments, and there are things on there that are so-called opportunities. There are committees that you're on or boards you're on or things like this. But my mind always works a little different, you know that. And so as I started reading it and started kind of going down that memory lane and was picturing things that I had been a part of through the years, I was kind of overwhelmed by some of the people I've had a chance to know, and I was really blessed by seeing some of the places that I had been able to be. But then I began asking that question that always comes to mind, and that is, what should I have done that I didn't do? What are the things that I should have accomplished that I didn't accomplish? If I had it to do over again, how would I do it differently than I did it last time? Or how would I maximize an opportunity that I've had in the past if I had a chance to do it over again? Do you ever do that? Do you ever think back over things and think, boy, if I'd had this chance again, this is the way I would have handled it, and it would have been different in some way or another? It's that tension between the should and the did. On the resume, it said what I did. My mind kept saying, but is there something I should have done that I didn't completely accomplish? Those are the things that really kind of give spice to life and also kind of keep you going. I love biographies. I like to read them. I like the reading of the lives, the accomplishments, the experiences, and the impacts of other people's lives. And if it's a biography or an autobiography, they do them in several different ways. At this time of year, there are several books that will come out that will say, how great am I, so that you'll vote for them. But then there are other things that come out that will talk about some cause that they have, and so they tell the story of their lives, and at the end of it, you're supposed to be inspired to join their cause. You've read those kind. Then there's some that are kind of reveal-all type of books where somebody will write a biography about somebody. They weren't who you thought they were, and they tell all these other stories about them. The ones I like are the ones that just go in without an agenda except to tell the story of the person's life, where you get to see how they began, what were the influences in their lives, what are the things that happened that made a difference, why did they go in this direction rather than that direction, why did they go and associate with this rather than that. They're fascinating stories. But the real transparent biographies or autobiographies are the ones that also include that tension between the shoulds and the dids. Where are the regrets? Where are the things that if I had it to do over, I would have done this differently? And then where are the things that they feel very satisfied and very proud of having accomplished, the things that they have done with their lives? Well, when I read these, I realize that sometimes things that were tried and not successful are in and of themselves successes. The fact that you tried something, the fact that you did something, the fact that you learned something, the fact of success or failure isn't the issue. It's what did you learn out of that? How did you grow in that? And sometimes something that seems like a failure here is the seed for the success that takes place over here. A person thinking that their life should head in this particular direction, and they hit a brick wall and they can't do what they thought they were supposed to do, and so they are forced to turn in a different direction, and they find wild success in something else. Those are the kinds of things that inspire my life, because I don't ever want to be on such a firm, solid track that I don't allow for the Spirit to turn the path just a bit, to change something in my life, to give me yet another opportunity, which means that every day I have to be listening to what God is saying for me to do next. That's the way we all should be. And we should also embrace what we call regrets and failures at times, because sometimes those are the things that teach us something about our lives. The real failure is when we don't try at all. I think of the words of John Greenleaf Whittier, who wrote the poem Maud Muller, speaking of, however you want to pronounce it, speaking of a judge who sees this beautiful maiden, and they kind of have love at first sight. But as time goes on, he decides he's going to marry someone who has a great deal of wealth, and she ends up settling for just who happened to be there. And so in that sense, they look back and kind of regret the fact that they did not marry their first love. And it is that true love that was lost that becomes a part of their dreams of lost youth. And the poem contains these words: "Then she who took up her burden of life again, saying only it might have been, alas for maiden, alas for judge, for rich repiner and household drudge, God pity them both, and pity us all, who vainly the dreams of youth recall. For of all sad words of tongue and pen, the saddest are these, it might have been." It's the might have been things that can either tank us or inspire us in life. But sometimes we allow that just to kind of catapult us a little bit. You remember Frank Sinatra's famous words that he would croon, "Regrets I've had a few, but then again too few to mention." There's a getting beyond that and going on to whatever is next within life. Well, the time to assure that we will not have the regrets is today. It's not waiting and later on looking back and saying, "Gee, I wish I'd done that differently." It is today, making the most of the day that we have. The Apostle Paul gives us a clear closing statement in our text. He gives a clear closing statement of his life. And when you look at it, he doesn't speak of the regrets, but they're implied. Those regrets would be up under there, because if you know the Apostle Paul's life, you know of things that were there that surely as he looked back, he said, "I wish I had not done that or been involved in that." So I want you to look with me in 2 Timothy 4, beginning with verse 6. And let's listen to a very familiar passage. But it is, in essence, Paul's autobiography shared with young Timothy, shared with us and anyone else who would read this particular passage, and it gives us kind of an insight into the way he assessed his life. And I want you to read between the lines too. What Paul said in 2 Timothy 4:6, "For I'm already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I fought a good fight. I finished the course. I kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, and not to only me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. I fought the good fight, I finished the course, I kept the faith. Now there's laid up for me the crown of righteousness. I did what I should in life, I have fulfilled what God expected, and I know what's next." But if you were to talk to Paul, what regrets would he have had? Would Paul have told you, "I wish I had not persecuted the church. Knowing now what I did, if I'd known then what I know right now, I wouldn't have persecuted the church. I would have understood that the church is the answer. It is not something to fight." Would he also have talked about how he would have come to Christ himself sooner? The experience that he'd had with Christ and the dependability of Christ's presence in his life and the strength that Christ has given him, would he not have said, I wish I had found this much earlier and had that experience all through my life? Does he have any other shoulds in there? What he reports are the dids of his life. I did fight a good fight. I did finish the course. I did keep the faith. But the shoulds lie in the background. Look in 2 Timothy 4. This isn't part of the text, but I want to add this in because I want you to see the context of what he just wrote. So he writes this very affirming autobiography. These are the things that happened, and I am in great shape. Don't worry about me. But then he says, do your best to come to me quickly. I need you. For Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia. Titus to Dalmatia. Sounds like his whole world is falling apart, doesn't it? Only Luke is with me. Get Mark, bring him with you, because he's helpful to me in my ministry. Then he said, I sent Tychus to Ephesus. And when you come, bring the cloak I left in Carpus at Troas, and my scrolls, especially the parchments. He left his coat and wanted them to bring it when they were coming. Alexander, the metal worker, did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he's done. You too should be on your guard against him, because he strongly opposed our message. At my first offense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen. That follows that other passage. So what he says is, life isn't perfect. Life has been a struggle for me. I've faced enemies. I've faced people who tried to undo the gospel. I've faced disappointment. I've faced abandonment at times. He said, look, it's going on right now. And it always will. But what I can tell you is, I fought the good fight. I finished the course. I kept the faith. That's going to be my testimony before the Lord. Why? Because every day he was going to walk with the Lord. Did he ask at any point what he could have done to keep some of these things from happening? Maybe. But what you see him doing is finding himself going back to that faith that he says, I kept the faith, and said, I'm confident that even in the middle of all these things, God will be with me. He certainly had a strong statement of what he did in the text, and he likens it to a fight, a race, and a faith experience. As I interact with people on a regular basis, just like you do, if you just listen to what they say, you listen to the conversation, and you just listen to how they respond to what is going on in life, you can learn a lot about that tension between the did and the should in their lives. You'll talk to somebody drawing near to retirement, and they'll say, well, I should have been saving more all along. I'm right at retirement time, and I don't know if I'm going to have enough to get me through retirement. I wish I had started saving earlier. I wish I had driven the car a little longer and put that extra money in the bank. I wish the shoulds. And sometimes you'll talk to somebody and say, I was taught really well, and I listened to the teaching, and I began saving when I was very young. I just put a little bit aside, and it's amazing to me. I'm heading into retirement now. I don't have any worries because I prepared and I did something every day, every month, every week. I did something toward my retirement. Have you heard people talk that way? The shoulds and the dids? Because you see, the truth of the matter is you can't be a year out from retirement and say, boy, I'd better get my retirement funds together, because you can't do it that quickly as a rule. You do it bit by bit by bit, day by day by day, increment by increment by increment, little by little, you build to the point of that. For Paul to give the testimony he did, he had been building to that point. He didn't fight the good fight, finish the course, and keep the faith a few minutes before God was going to call him home. This is a testimony to what life had been like. Sometimes I speak to people about the work that they do. And it's impossible for them to work in a place for years and just kind of punch the clock, just do their thing, kind of come and go, not be invested in it that much. And then right toward the end of their time, they'll say, "Ooh, I want to do something significant. I want to do something to really help this business. I want to really make a difference right here." That's not the way it happens. Day by day, you come in with the energy and the expectation that today I will do something that will be significant and meaningful for this business. And then at the end of it, they say, "Look at what you did and how much you accomplished." As you look back at life in your work, you say, "Well, because I made this decision, because I did this, I was recognized for this, and I got a promotion for this. And then they gave me this assignment because I did this one well and this other." And you see the growing in the experience of life. Some people I've talked to said, "Well, I worked 30 years in that job, and all I did is just got up in the morning, went in, just did what I did, and went on back home that night. There is no passion, there is no fulfillment." And at the end of it, they even ask the question, what did it really matter? Should and did. The tension that is in there. And the way you prevent that is day by day, you enter it with excitement and with joy, with vision and expectation. Students come to the final exam time. How many times do we get to the point, I remember, and you say, "Boy, I really wish I'd paid more attention in class"? How many times have they gone to teachers and said, "Is that going to be on the exam? Can you help me? What were we really talking about here? What matters out of this?" How many times have students come to the point that they said, "I wish I'd listened better, taken better notes, and done this, rather than having to stay up all night the night before the final exam"? And then there's some that just kept up with it all along. They came to the end, they barely had to study for the exam because they knew it, it fit into the process, they had studied it every day. The should, the did, the balance that's there. Some people talk of family members who are nearing the end of life, and they often struggle with that. Have I been good enough? Have I done enough? Have I been there for them enough? And there are cases where people will say, "I'm doing everything I can to just try to catch up with what I should have been doing all along. I've neglected things all along." The should and the did. There are others who say, "I've had such a relationship with this person all their lives, all my life, that when time came for them to go, I would miss them, but I am at peace because I have watched them step by step all the way to the door. And I can send them off with peace and knowing I did everything that I possibly could." The difference between trying to catch up at the end and the difference between having that satisfaction. I talked to a friend recently who had just lost her mother. In the conversation, the thing that just absolutely touched me, especially thinking about what I was working on for this sermon, I said, "Well, you're going to be okay." She said, "Well, because they didn't live close to each other at this point." She said, "From the day I left home, I've called my mother every day of the world. I've never missed a day." So when the time came at the end, there was a certain peace and a certain fullness in the relationship that didn't feel like what I should have done, but she could say, "This is what I did." The should, the did. It makes all the difference in the world. The way we keep relationships strong is that every day, we make that relationship special. I know people who tell each other that they love each other every day, sometimes many times in the day. I know people who refuse to leave each other with an ongoing misunderstanding or conflict. They want peace or at least understanding before they ever separate, so that no matter what happens, if something unusual happened, there would be no regret and nothing to catch up on, because they nurtured the relationship moment by moment. When I'm privileged to have a premarital counseling conversation with a couple, sometimes I'll be asked, tell me, how is it, I'll say, what questions do you have? How is it that marriage won't become stale? How is it I'm not going to end up back here in 15, 20 years saying, it's just kind of gotten dry. We've just kind of grown apart. I said, that's simple. Every day you get up, you decide that's not going to happen. Every day you get up, you make it a special day and a special moment. Every day when you face the new day, this is the day the Lord's made, and this is what I'm going to do with it. So if life is long or if it's short, there will be no regrets at that point. It's the best advice that I can give. You have intentionality that says, I will never let it grow stale. It's not something that happens to me, it's something that I let happen through neglect. I remember revival preachers standing in front of congregations, and I was in those congregations, and I'd see them in these impassioned moments, usually at the end of the revival service, and here they are about to give the invitation, and they tell some heart-wrenching story of, and we've heard them 1,000 of them. Lynn, he knows what I'm talking about. I always call them meat grinder stories. It's where a person meets Jesus right before they fall in the meat grinder. That's the way they would always tell it. But it was something that just right before it happened, they were saved. And I'd hear that, and people would have tears, and they'd be emotionally changed. But I always felt empty, every time. I thought, isn't it sad that they waited till that last minute rather than meeting Jesus early enough to enjoy the walk with him through life? Life would have been so empty for me had I not had Jesus to walk with all the way through life. I hate to think I would have waited till the last minute and hoped that I could get it in right up under the wire. And then I realized it really wasn't about whether you go to heaven or not. It's whether you love Jesus and walk with Jesus every day. That's what it's about. That's the point. It is a nurturing, intentional relationship. And you know what affected me on that more than anything? It's that little chorus we used to sing. Do you remember that little chorus? Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. Do you remember that chorus? Can you sing it? Could y'all sing that with me real quick? Ready? Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. Every day with Jesus, I love him more and more. Jesus saves and keeps me, and he's the one I'm living for. Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. That's what Paul wanted to get across to us, is that fighting the good fight and finishing the course and keeping the faith is a product, a dividend from an investment. It is not something that we can all of a sudden do. Our author, Daniel Pink, who works in the area of motivation and practical thinking with human interaction, he was in an interview with the Washingtonian, and he said this: we tend to say to people right now, not to worry, not to allow regrets to bother you at all. Look forward, never look backward. Think positive, be positive. But he said, I add a little right angle to that and say, if you feel a regret, pay attention to it. It's trying to tell you something you need to fix. Makes sense to me. When we have these moments and we say, I really ought to do more, then do it. Make that day a part of that intentional experience. What Paul is saying is that he's satisfied with his life because he made good investments there. Fighting the good fight meant that he picked the things that needed to be fought for, and he worked on those. We live in a world that needs people to stand up and fight for the good things, to make a difference in people's lives, to fight for the values, to carry the message of Jesus to others, not to sit there wringing our hands and saying, I wish something would happen, but to say, I want to fight that fight. I want to be a part of it. I want to be faithful to my Lord, and if He leads me to a point where I have a chance to have a voice in it, I will. That's what Paul had to understand. You know, I look at people fighting around the world, and if you get anything inspirational out of the Russia-Ukraine thing, Russia is having to grab people off the street and beg people to go fight. The Ukrainian people, they're having to say, enough already, because they're out fighting and doing what they can, because the passion is there, the intentionality is there, the purpose is there. Paul said that's exactly what we have. Passion and purpose and intentionality when it comes to that. So he says, I fought the fight, I also finished the race. He didn't say I won the race. Please pay attention to that. You know, some of the most inspirational stories I've heard are not of the people who came across the finish line first, but the person who had some kind of a injury or something, and it took them an hour longer than anybody else in the whole race, but they didn't give up until they came across the finish line. That's all God asks, is the intentionality that says, I'm crossing that finish line if it takes me forever. I'll never lose my focus. And keeping the faith is where Paul says, and God never let me down. A fight does not have breaks. It is relentless. And it's a determined journey where we don't stop for even a minute. Samuel Medley was a man in England. He was born in actually 1738. He was reared by his grandfather, taught by his grandfather. And he got involved with some people who weren't very nice other guys. And so his moral values dropped, and he got in all sorts of trouble, to the point that his parents decided, we're going to apprentice him to a job. So they sent him to an oil field to work with an oil man there. And that didn't work real well. He only lasted 3 years, but he was apprenticed, which is a contract. The only way he could get out of that is to join the military. So he joined the military, and he ended up in the Navy. Ended up in a battle and was injured on his leg. The leg injury was so bad that it kept getting worse and worse. And finally they said, if it's not better by morning, we're going to have to amputate this thing. That was his come to Jesus moment. And that night is when he thought back over what his grandfather had taught him, had tried to teach him, in terms of values, in terms of prayer, in terms of all of that. And he began to pray. I mean, really pray. Not the cursory prayers where he would just say what his grandfather told him to, but where he said, Jesus, if you're there, I need something here. By morning, his leg was better, enough better that they decided to wait on the amputation and ultimately never had to do it. But that stuck with him, and he kept thinking about it. And this person, this young man, who was still quite young at that point, began to think how he could be someone who served the Lord. And he did. So he started a school and he taught, and it was a very popular school. And then he began to preach. And his preaching was so popular that he became pastor of a church. And then after he did that, he had a focus on seamen and on servicemen. And he worked with them. And it was so important, the message that he told, that so many people came, they had to literally go build a new building for them to be able to contain the people. One of the songs that he wrote, he began to write some music. And one of the songs he wrote was, I know that my Redeemer lives. Because of his experience, he knew. And these are some of the words. They're not the normal hymn that you sing. He lives to bless me with his love. He lives to plead for me above. He lives my hungering soul to feed. He lives to help me in time of need. He lives to silence all my fears. He lives to wipe away my tears. He lives to calm my troubled heart. He lives all blessings to impart. That's where he ended up. And after his conversion experience, he too could join the Apostle Paul and talk about fighting the good fight, finishing the course, and keeping the faith. Because his intention became to live for Jesus every day. And he didn't have to catch up. The same is true for us. Every day with Jesus really is sweeter than the day before. Amen. Spirit of God, as we bow before you and look into your face, we see the warmth of invitation where you draw us into your purpose and your will. I pray that you will remind us that you are living with us, you're living in us, you're living in our world, and that as we serve you faithfully, that we build daily that relationship and we fulfill the expectations that you have for us for life. May one day, because we decide every morning to live for you, may one day we be able to say before you, we fought the good fight, we finished the course, and we kept the faith. Help us not to decide to try to catch up, but to build that each day. In Jesus' name, amen.